At daybreak, the arrows soared from the edge of the forest, slicing through the morning light to sever the ropes binding Eliza Farnsworth to the ancient oak, right as a treacherous judge and a notorious outlaw threatened the entire town. If you want to know how one impossible shot reshaped an entire community and whether hope could truly triumph over greed and fear, you'll need to hear every twist of this tale, from tense showdowns to newfound alliances. Nothing is what it seems in Maple Creek. Stay with us until the very end to see how an unbreakable spirit, a skilled Shawnee archer, and a determined lawman bring justice where corruption nearly prevailed. And remember to subscribe to this channel for more captivating frontier adventures where courage and cunning often stand as the only shields against a dangerous land. Your support means everything, and you won't want to miss the ending that changes all expectations. Maple Creek Valley lay quietly between the soft ridges of the Appalachian foothills, as though cradled by the hands of ancient hills. It was the year 1793, and while the American Revolution was more than a decade in the past, the frontier remained a zone where civilization stood on uncertain ground against the encroaching wilderness. The small settlement named Maple Creek had sprouted up along the winding river from which it drew its name, an assortment of log cabins, a fledgling marketplace, a modest courthouse, and a smithy. In the heart of the town stood the venerable Maple Creek oak, a towering tree that offered shade to merchants and children by day, but also served as a grim spectacle whenever frontier justice demanded a visible stage. This oak, with its 3 heavy horizontal limbs, had borne the weight of 2 hangings in the previous year, each one leaving the townsfolk jittery about the line between law and personal vendetta. It was near this giant oak that Eliza Farnsworth found herself walking at dawn, her skirt collecting dampness from the dew, her expression one of calm intent. At 22, Eliza had taken on responsibilities few in Maple Creek would have expected from a young woman. Yet she carried them with the same quiet fortitude she had learned from her late father, Dr. Farnsworth, the only physician in the valley until his death 2 winters earlier. Eliza was not the typical frontierswoman her father had insisted she learn every element of medicine he could teach, and so from a tender age she had absorbed knowledge of herbs, anatomy, childbirth, and healing, a unique education supplemented by her paternal grandmother's Cherokee heritage. As Eliza proceeded down the muddy pathway, she noticed the general store's lone proprietor, Mr. Kirby, standing at the porch with a broom in his hand, wiping away the leaves that had blown in during the night. "You're up especially early today, Miss Farnsworth," he remarked, leaning on his broom. "Anything particular going on?" Eliza inclined her head. "Sarah Mitchell's time is coming. The baby sits awkwardly, so I'm off to gather a few necessary herbs. I'll need to brew something to ease the birth pains." Kirby nodded, inviting her in. Inside, she selected dried raspberry leaves, willow bark, and a small pouch of mother's wort. As she moved through the cramped wood plank aisles, the storekeeper followed, voice lowered. "Heard tell that Cordell's gang might be on the prowl again. Sheriff Daniels brought in one of them last night, half beaten, and claiming Cordell was ready to strike somewhere outside the valley." Eliza's face grew serious. Cordell's band had tormented Maple Creek and neighboring settlements for months. Rumors spoke of stolen horses, burned homesteads, and travelers robbed on lonely roads. "Which one did the sheriff catch?" she asked, measuring the correct amounts of herbs into paper packets. "Silas Tucker, one of Cordell's smaller fish." Kirby sighed, glancing at the store's window as though expecting trouble. "But you know how it goes. Sometimes the smaller fish can lead to bigger fish if a man is willing to talk." Eliza paid for the herbs and left for the Mitchell cabin, a mile north of town. On her way, she noted the hush that clung to the settlement, an unease in the air, as though Maple Creek itself was holding its breath. Passing the narrow jailhouse, she spotted Sheriff Aiden Daniels, a tall, rugged man in his mid-40s who had served in the Revolution alongside her father. He stood outside, arms folded, scanning the street as if expecting trouble. He tipped his hat to her in greeting. "Morning, Miss Farnsworth. I expect you're heading to help the Mitchells. Been hearing that baby's due soon?" She nodded. "Yes. Sheriff Sarah's in the final stages, but the child is misaligned. I'll do what I can." Daniel's gaze swept over the dusty street. "Just mind yourself. We've gotten wind that Cordell might be lying in wait along the North Trail. The tension around here isn't just about stolen goods anymore. Folks are on edge." Eliza accepted his caution, though inwardly she was more concerned for Sarah Mitchell and the delicate birth that awaited. She quickened her pace, the basket of herbs rustling against her hip her father's teachings echoing in her mind. Focus on the life before you. Danger is the constant wind beneath the frontier. The Mitchell cabin, perched on a small hill with a decent view of Maple Creek River, was alive with a different urgency, the arrival of new life. As Eliza stepped onto the porch, she could already hear Sarah Mitchell's labored breathing through the open door. Within the cabin was warm from the fireplace, but the air held the tension of an impending birth that had proven more difficult than usual. Gregory Mitchell. Sarah's husband paced wildly near the hearth, every creak of the floorboards amplifying his anxiety. Eliza Gregory exhaled with relief when she came inside. He dropped the split log he'd been holding. She's been calling for you. The pains are growing close, but the baby isn't turning the right way. Eliza offered a reassuring nod. Let me see her. She found Sarah in the only bedroom, small space with rough log walls but kept scrupulously clean. The woman lay on a bed of straw mattress, her blonde hair soaked with perspiration, her expression etched with fatigue and fear. Eliza. Sarah gasped, relief mingling with pain. Eliza set down her basket, quickly washing her hands in a basin of warm water. She began to examine Sarah with the practiced confidence gleaned from her father's side whenever he had delivered children before his death. After a moment, Eliza frowned. The baby's breech, she muttered. We'll have to try to rotate it before the contractions become too strong. Using the herbs from her basket, Eliza brewed a soothing tea that contained mother's wort and chamomile, then administered it to Sarah in small sips. She massaged the expectant mother's abdomen gently but firmly, feeling for the infant's position and trying to guide its limbs into a safer angle. Gregory hovered in the doorway, face-pale hands shaking his eyes, darting from Eliza to his wife. Outside, the soft sunshine turned to a brighter glow, but within the cabin, the hours felt stretched into a singular focus. Eliza's entire world narrowed to Sarah's ragged breathing and the urgent shift of fetal limbs beneath her hands. She coached the mother on breathing timing, the contractions with the measured calm of a seasoned midwife. Finally, the baby shifted. There, Eliza murmured, sweat beading on her own brow from the tension. He's turned. Now we wait for the next set of contractions to do their work. In the small break before the final stage, Eliza stepped outside, drawing in several lungfuls of crisp air. Gregory stood close by, arms folded protectively across his chest. Thank you, he managed, voice trembling. I've never felt so helpless. You're doing what's needed, Eliza answered gently, keeping the fire going, being here for Sarah. Sometimes the father's role in childbirth is to provide comfort and stability. She gave a short smile. Now let's go help your wife finish what her body has started. Back inside, the next wave of contractions gripped Sarah, who cried out, straining with the force of nature surging through her. Eliza maintained steady encouragement, applying gentle pressure and directing Sarah's breathing. The baby crowned at last, followed by a sudden panicked hush, broken by a triumphant wail. A boy, healthy and pink-lunged, filled the cramped cabin with cries that signaled his arrival to all the mountains. Sarah sank back sobbing with relief as Eliza cleaned and wrapped the newborn in a soft cloth. You have a son, she announced, voice thick with emotion. His future lies wide open. Gregory's tears mixed with laughter as he took the infant boy into his arms. We'll name him Michael, he decided, gaze locked on Sarah's exhausted smile after my grandfather. Eliza gathered her things, exhaustion washing over her in a wave of satisfaction. Her father's teachings had once again proven their worth in a land where trained doctors were scarce. As she left the cabin, the baby's cries mingled with the midday sun, bringing new warmth to the Maple Creek Valley. Descending the hill, Eliza's mind lingered on the Mitchells' success story, a small triumph overshadowed by a creeping sense of unease that clung to Maple Creek like a stray mist. She'd caught glimpses of men riding hastily on the opposite ridges, heard hushed rumors of Cordell's gang, and felt the tension mounting with every day that passed. The supply wagon from Coopersville was supposed to arrive soon, bearing essential goods medicine, spare parts, flour for families like the Turners. But fear whispered that the wagon would never arrive if Cordell got his way. Halfway back to town, the path bent near a cluster of alders, and Eliza noticed hoof prints stamped into the softened ground. Fresh and numerous, she crouched touching the imprints, possibly a group of riders, maybe 7 or 8, traveling more quickly than caution would advise. The sense of impending crisis nipped at her thoughts again. Marshals or outlaws? She found her answer in the next 100 yards. 2 more sets of tracks diverged, one heading east, the other continuing north. Eliza resumed her walk, mind reeling with speculation. It was not lost on her that Cordell's group, rumored to be short on supplies, might be desperate enough to intercept the Coopersville wagon or even stage a bold raid closer to Maple Creek. Approaching the town's edge, she heard raised voices from somewhere near the hastily built jailhouse. Rounding the corner, she found a group of townsmen gathered outside while Sheriff Aiden Daniels stood on the small porch of the jail, arms crossed, exuding the unflappable calm that had earned him deep respect over the years. His graying hair and lined features spoke of countless trials in this harsh frontier. "What's all this about?" Eliza asked, weaving between onlookers until she reached the front. She spotted Judge Atkinson, the circuit judge for these parts, confronting Sheriff Daniels with an expression that seemed half outraged, half theatrical. Judge Atkinson was a man in his 50s, tall and broad in build, hair prematurely silvered. He had an aura of practiced power about him, as though accustomed to being listened to. He turned, eyes settling on Eliza. "Miss Farnsworth?" he greeted coldly. "I see you still engage in your father's profession, despite the obvious impropriety." Eliza stiffened at the sneer in his voice, but her reply was steady. "Perhaps your definition of impropriety differs from mine. Your Honor, I've just delivered a healthy child. Meanwhile, it sounds like there's more pressing business than a woman practicing medicine." The judge's gaze flicked dismissively. "We've been discussing the prisoner that Sheriff Daniels insists on keeping alive, one Silas Tucker, a known associate of Cordell. My inclination is swift frontier justice for outlaws who murder and plunder." A hush fell among the gathered men. Sheriff Daniels' weathered features hardened. "With respect, Judge Atkinson Tucker might help us locate Cordell's main camp. If we kill him outright, we lose the chance to save families from future raids." A ripple of agreement passed through the onlookers. Some of them had lost livestock to Cordell's men. Others had lost entire barns to arson. Judge Atkinson's eyes narrowed clearly, displeased that his usual hold on the settlement's legal matters was slipping. "And if Cordell strikes first, how many more good men will die while we coddle murderers in the jail?" Eliza stepped closer, speaking before her courage could fail her. "Aren't 3 men from Maple Creek already rumored to have died in ambushes by Cordell? We want to end the bloodshed, not compound it." Atkinson's scowl deepened. "Indeed, perhaps Tucker's worthless talk can spin some story about how we can all hold hands with renegade gangs. The more time we waste, the deeper Cordell roots himself in these hills." He cast a final withering look at Sheriff Daniels. "But very well. We'll wait for a day or two. If Tucker doesn't produce results, I'll see him swing from Maple Creek Oak." With that threat, Atkinson turned on his heel and stalked away, his coat flaring behind him like a judge's robe on the move. The townspeople began dispersing in uneasy murmurs, sensing that nothing had truly been resolved. Eliza exchanged a glance with the sheriff. There was an unspoken worry in his eyes, something more pressing than the usual tension. "Be watchful," Daniels advised softly. "Atkinson's ambitions are bigger than Maple Creek. He's not above using law as a facade for personal power." She nodded, feeling the subtle shift in the town's atmosphere. It was as though a noose hovered over them all, waiting for the right moment to tighten. For a moment, she recalled her father's warnings about men who wear the mask of authority but hunger for something else, something that never boded well for honest folk. That same afternoon, Eliza decided to make a short visit to check on young James Turner, a boy of about 8 who was recovering from a serious fever. She had been tending him for nearly a week, and though he seemed to improve with each new remedy, his mother's worried eyes insisted on further reassurance. Passing the Maple Creek Oak, its branches casting spindly shadows in the lengthening sunlight, Eliza couldn't help but sense an odd disquiet. She knew the oak had been used for hangings, that its sturdy limbs had carried the final weight of 2 condemned men the previous year. It struck her as an uneasy symbol of how precariously justice balanced in the settlement. When she reached the Turner homestead, perched near the shallow part of the creek, she found Rebecca Turner at the door, face lined with worry. "He's been restless again. Miss Farnsworth," she explained, leading Eliza inside. "Fevers spiked these last 2 nights." Eliza placed a gentle hand on the boy's forehead, assessing his temperature was indeed high, sweat dampening his dark hair. She concocted a fresh poultice of herbs from her basket, applying it to his chest, and whispered reassuring words about how he'd soon be playing by the creek again. "You truly have a gift," Rebecca said softly, watching with haunted eyes. "Without Dr. Farnsworth around, we'd be lost if not for you." Eliza offered a reassuring smile, though her father's absence remained an aching void in her life. "He taught me everything he could. It's a privilege to help. Let James rest. Keep him cool in drinking water. I'll return in the morning." Once outside, she paused, noticing again the hush that settled on Maple Creek. Through the distant haze of dust, she spotted a rider approaching at a gallop. Immediately, tension coiled within her. Riders this fast often carried ill news. She moved quickly to intercept at the crossroads where the rider, a middle-aged man with sweat-soaked hair and a dirt-caked face, stopped abruptly. Trouble, he panted, eyes wide. Cordell's men were seen near the entrance to the pass. They might be planning to rob the Coopersville supply wagon. Eliza's heart sank. Have you told the sheriff just now? He tugged at his reins. Sheriff Daniels wants volunteers to ride out at first light. See if they can intercept Cordell before he sets up an ambush. Meanwhile, Judge Atkinson's talking about a public hearing tomorrow to deal with this Tucker fellow. Eliza nodded, the pieces aligning in her head. If Cordell was indeed waiting to ambush the supply wagon, then not only was the settlement at risk of losing essential medicine and goods, but also the precarious balance of power might tip squarely into chaos. She hurried toward the jailhouse, her footsteps churning up dust in the cooling evening air. At the jailhouse, the door stood slightly ajar. Deputy Russell hovered outside, exchanging tense words with Samuel Kirby, the storekeeper. Inside, Eliza glimpsed the glow of lantern light and the silhouette of Sheriff Daniels. She stepped in to find the sheriff leaning over the battered form of Silas Tucker, who was slumped against the cell bars. Sheriff, Eliza said quietly, "But I heard about Cordell. Please, is there anything I can do to help?" Daniels straightened. "Miss Farnsworth Tucker's here. Claims Cordell has big plans soon. And bigger than just ambushing a wagon. But he won't speak details. Not sure if he's more afraid of Cordell's wrath or Atkinson's gallows." Eliza nodded gravely, then looked at Tucker's swollen cheek and split lip. "If you want him able to talk at all, you'll need someone to treat these wounds. He can't form words if his jaw's broken." From the shadows, Judge Atkinson's voice slid into the conversation. "We can't be coddling criminals. Farnsworth, the quicker the rope, the better. We already lost 3 men to Cordell's raids. Enough is enough." Eliza swallowed her frustration. She recognized that ingrained fury in the judge's tone. He thrived on a brand of justice that required minimal due process and maximum impact. His injuries hamper his speech. "If you want real answers about Cordell's plans, let me at least tend him." To her mild surprise, the sheriff and the judge both offered no objection, though it was clear Atkinson did so grudgingly. She kneeled by Tucker, cleaning the blood from his face and pressing a cool rag to reduce swelling. Under her father's old stethoscope, an heirloom she carried, she assessed that Tucker's ribs might be bruised but not broken. "Cordell," he hissed, wincing at her touch. "You don't know what he's capable of. He'll burn Maple Creek to the ground if he thinks it serves him. He's done it before in other valleys," Atkinson snorted. "More lies. Where's your gang, Tucker? Where's the rest of them? That's what we need." But Tucker fell silent again, eyes darting around the room as though he feared eavesdroppers even more than the throbbing pain in his jaw. Eliza felt a shiver of dread. The lines between law and lawlessness were blurring at an alarming rate. Night settled over Maple Creek, bringing with it a restless quiet. Lanterns glowed in windows, but few people lingered outside. Even the tavern's usual patrons seemed subdued, as though a heavy hush had fallen on the settlement. Eliza returned to her small cabin at the edge of town, bone-tired from the day's events, but too keyed up to sleep. She lit a single candle and took a seat at the rickety desk where her father's medical books still stood. Some were in English, others in Cherokee or Latin. She ran her fingers over the spines, seeking comfort in the memory of how he used to read them. By the flickering light, her eyes strayed to a small cedar box near the desk's corner. Within it lay her father's personal effects, including an old treaty map that had mystified her the few times she had glanced at it. It showed territory lines, some official seals, and a note in her father's hand referencing an agreement with local Shawnee tribes. She opened the box and retrieved the folded parchment, studying it again. The lines indicated that the region around Maple Creek, including some land near the confluence of 2 rivers, had been designated as belonging to the Shawnee people. She recalled hearing rumors about gold hidden in those hills, rumors her father had always dismissed as dangerous illusions. Could it be that the territory's legal status was fueling the tension now enveloping the valley? A soft knock at her door startled her. She rose, blowing out the candle in caution. The knock came again, quiet but urgent. Eliza grabbed her small knife and approached. "Who is it?" "It's me, James Finch," a voice whispered. "Deputy Finch, please open up." She drew the bolt aside to let the young deputy in. He stood there, eyes wide, breath short, as though he'd been running. Miss Farnsworth, sorry to intrude at this hour, but I had nowhere else to turn. Sheriff Daniels and a handful of men left earlier in the evening to scout the pass. See if they could find Cordell's band before dawn. Judge Atkinson is, well, let's just say he's gathering a posse of his own, and something about it feels all wrong. Come in, she said, motioning him inside. Deputy Finch stepped into the cramped space, shutting the door behind him. He eyed her father's books, the cedar box on the desk, and the single bed with a blanket folded carefully at the foot, traces of Eliza's lonely existence since her father's death. Finch spoke in a hushed tone. There's talk that tomorrow morning Atkinson plans to hold a special hearing about Tucker, and possibly you too, Miss Farnsworth. Me. Eliza's heart pounded. What have I done except deliver babies and treat fevers? The deputy shrugged, helplessly, eyes darting around as though the shadows might hide eavesdroppers. Atkinson's been saying you might have ties to the Cherokee or Shawnee and that because of your father's connections, you're not entirely loyal to Maple Creek. It's nonsense, of course, but rumor spreads easily. Her chest tightened with disbelief. He's accusing me of disloyalty just because of my heritage. That's monstrous. Finch lowered his voice even more. Monstrous or not, some folks buy into it. They say you vanish into the hills, gather strange plants. They recall your father was half Cherokee. Atkinson's been hinting you could be feeding information to outsiders like Cordell about the settlement's vulnerabilities. Anger flashed through her. Judge Atkinson is the one who's a danger to Maple Creek. He's twisting the law for personal gain. That's why I'm here, Finch explained, producing a folded piece of paper from his jacket. I found this dropped outside the jail notes about forging documents referencing your name. I fear it's part of a larger plot to pin something dreadful on you. Eliza stared at the paper, dread curling in her stomach. A swirl of half-formed ideas came together. The rumored gold deposit, the land treaty, and Judge Atkinson's manipulative hold on the community. She recalled her father's caution about men who see opportunity in a misunderstood frontier. We have to warn the sheriff, she decided, and find proof to expose Atkinson's corruption. Finch nodded. But first, keep your head down tonight. The judge might act sooner than we expect. But caution alone did not save Eliza Farnsworth. Even as Deputy Finch slipped back into the night, promising to reach Sheriff Daniels by dawn, a knock sounded again at her door. This one harder, more insistent. Eliza's blood ran cold. Another visitor at this hour was no accident of necessity. She gripped the small knife, breathing steadily, and opened the door a crack. Deputy Lionel Green, a man Eliza barely knew, stood there with three others. Their tense postures and the metallic glint of rifles told her this was not a social call. Eliza Farnsworth, Green pronounced in a trembling attempt at authority. Judge Atkinson wants you to come with us. There's urgent business in the town square. Behind him, the other men, rougher sorts. Eliza recognized from the outskirts of Maple Creek, crowded closer. Panic fluttered in her chest, but she pushed it down. At this hour, why she demanded stepping back to maintain control of her space. Green avoided her eyes, shifting uncomfortably. There's talk that you've been aiding outsiders, especially with Cordell threatening the settlement. That's absurd, she replied. Voice taut, you know, I've done nothing but help Maple Creek. One of the rougher men spat on the threshold. We ain't so sure about that. Now come along, quiet or it'll go worse. Realizing resistance here could lead to violence. Eliza tucked her knife discreetly into her belt behind her skirt, then followed them. Her mind racing for an escape or a witness who might intervene. They marched her straight through Maple Creek's darkened center, lamplight flickering in windows as curious faces peered out. Mr. Kirby stood on his porch but did not speak. A few others watched anxiously, uncertain how to respond. It was exactly the scenario Atkinson must have orchestrated, public and intimidating. At the Maple Creek Oak, the men forced Eliza's wrists together, and Deputy Green, with trembling reluctance, began binding them with coarse rope. She recognized fear in his eyes. Perhaps he didn't believe the accusations, but felt trapped by Atkinson's power moments later. Judge Atkinson himself appeared, lantern in hand, his face set in grim satisfaction. Eliza Farnsworth, he said, voice ringing out in the still night air. You stand accused of conspiring to undermine Maple Creek's safety, communicating with Cordell's gang, or even certain Shawnee elements to expose our vulnerabilities. A murmur rippled among the onlookers. Atkinson pressed on. We found notes referencing your father's so-called land treaties, your rummaging in the hills, your Cherokee blood. In these perilous times, we can't risk a traitor among us. So you'll remain here bound to this oak until Sheriff Daniels returns. If I'm satisfied with your innocence, perhaps we'll see you set free. Eliza's eyes flashed with anger and no small measure of fear. This is madness. I have never betrayed. Maple Creek, show me your so-called evidence, Atkinson smirked. The evidence is well hidden, my dear, and you'll wait until dawn for your hearing. Assuming Cordell's men don't strike first. He signaled, and the men tightened the ropes until Eliza's breath caught. She clenched her teeth against the pain. The circle of watchers gradually dispersed under Atkinson's command, leaving only 2 guards posted at a short distance. Eliza realized she was being made into an example, a living warning that the judge held the final say in Maple Creek. Hours passed. The night air grew cold and her wrists throbbed from the rope. She tried to shift her position for comfort, but the bonds allowed only limited movement. She was left alone, strapped to an ancient tree that had witnessed more tragedy than anyone cared to recall. She glanced at the thick branches overhead, wondering if the judge intended a hanging come morning if no one intervened. Her thoughts turned to the child she'd delivered that day to the family she'd helped. That she could be accused of treachery merely because she was part Cherokee by heritage both outraged and terrified her. She prayed that Sheriff Daniels or someone with sense would arrive in time to stop this travesty. Then amidst her despair, Eliza sensed eyes upon her. She scanned the darkness, failing to see any silhouette among the faint shapes of the silent buildings. She exhaled exhausted. Possibly she thought it was just her nerves or the illusions that come from too many hours of fear and tension. Yet she could not shake the impression that someone or something hovered at the edge of the lamplight, watchful and waiting. First light broke painting Maple Creek in pale shades of pink and gold. Though it offered little warmth, Eliza Farnsworth had not slept, her wrists raw and shoulders aching from hours of being chained upright to the oak. The guards who had watched her grew lax toward dawn, one even strolling off to fetch breakfast. She remained arms overhead, the rope biting into her flesh whenever she tried to shift. The townspeople began stirring, stepping outside to greet a day that arrived with more trepidation than hope. Some passed by the oak with awkward glances, unwilling or afraid to challenge the judge's authority. Others openly stared as if uncertain whether they pitied or condemned her. Through the haze of her fatigue, Eliza recognized Mr. Kirby approaching, carrying a small cup of water and a piece of bread. "Eliza," he whispered, glancing around for watchers. "This is all wrong. I tried to speak up, but Atkinson's men threatened me." He held out the water and bread, but the remaining guard, a burly man, growled and shoved Kirby back. "No mercy for traitors," the guard snapped, "Judge's orders." "She gets nothing." Eliza swallowed her throat, parched and lips chapped. Kirby hesitated, torn between obeying the order and wanting to help. Finally, he stepped away, leaving the water on the ground in silent defiance. The guard let him go, perhaps deciding the gesture was too minor to bother. Every moment felt like an hour. Eliza's thoughts grew hazy with dehydration and hunger. She wondered if Deputy Finch had succeeded in finding Sheriff Daniels, or if the sheriff had been ambushed by Cordell. She wondered if Cordell was even now marching upon Maple Creek with a band of cutthroats. Then unexpectedly, Judge Atkinson appeared flanked by a small group of men, some of whom Eliza recognized as easily swayed townsfolk. The judge's face looked triumphant. "Well, Miss Farnsworth," he began loud enough for the assembling crowd to hear, "I trust your night gave you time to reflect on the severity of your suspected crimes." She mustered her strength, refusing to lower her gaze. "I have no crimes to reflect upon, only your injustice. This entire spectacle is a travesty." Atkinson's gaze flicked over her exhausted form. No sympathy in his steely eyes. "I'm prepared to hold a hearing at midday, if Sheriff Daniels hasn't returned with news. If by then no evidence exonerates you, we shall proceed with frontier justice." "Frontier justice," repeated a voice from behind the crowd. A few people parted, revealing Sarah Mitchell, pale from recent childbirth, leaning on her husband's arm. She had walked from her home, or more likely ridden part way, to stand with trembling resolve Judge Atkinson. "Eliza Farnsworth saved my life and my son's life just yesterday. How can you accuse her of plotting with outlaws?" Atkinson paused momentarily, nonplussed. But then his voice rose, refined from years of legal showmanship. "Her personal kindness is not under question, Mrs. Mitchell, but loyalty is measured when the stakes are highest. Certain documents suggest she's been in contact with outside forces, whether Cordell or Shawnee tribes with a grudge against Maple Creek. Our settlement stands on the brink of violence, and we must ensure no one inside these walls conspires with our enemies." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some looked moved by Sarah's plea, Others seemed swayed by Atkinson's reasoning. Eliza's heart thundered painfully. If only the townspeople knew that a bigger scheme was unfolding, one that threatened them as much as it threatened her. Suddenly, a cry split the uneasy hush. Riders on the West Road. People turned to see dust rising beyond the outskirts of Maple Creek. A wave of new tension lapped through the crowd. Perhaps it was Sheriff Daniels, or perhaps it was Cordell himself. Atkinson's jaw tightened. He ordered the men to positions along the main street. The guard near Eliza stepped away, called by the judge to help gather arms. With trembling effort, Eliza tested her bonds again, but they remained too tight to simply slip free. She sagged back against the oak. Whatever was coming might well decide her fate before midday. If it was Cordell, Maple Creek could erupt in bloodshed. If it was Daniels, maybe truth would have a chance. She squinted through the dust, heart pounding in her ears as shapes began to form in the swirling haze. Her hopes soared and then faltered because she saw not a single line of riders but multiple. And one group definitely wore the ragged hats and mismatched uniforms typical of outlaws. Chaos bristled in the morning air. Eliza Farnsworth braced herself against the rough bark, uncertain if rescue or ruin, galloped toward Maple Creek. At the threshold of chaos, Maple Creek held its collective breath as two sets of riders reached the outskirts from opposite directions. On one side, Sheriff Daniels and a handful of his men appeared dust-caked but upright, having apparently survived the attempt to find Cordell's hideout. On the other side, a cluster of outlaws emerged from the bend in the road, and at their head, on a black horse with a scar across his flank, rode Cordell, broad-shouldered, bearded, and exuding the grim confidence of a man who'd never met a conflict he couldn't profit from. The townspeople scrambled, some seeking cover, others forming an uncertain line behind Judge Atkinson's men. Eliza twisted her head to see Sheriff Daniels dismount, his gaze sweeping across the throng until it locked onto her, a flash of alarm and anger flickering there as he witnessed her bound to the oak. She had never been so relieved to see him battered. In all, Judge Atkinson stepped forward, trying to hold on to the same authority he'd wielded the night before. "Sheriff Daniels," he called, projecting his voice with a courtroom's flourish. "I see you've returned just in time. We have a traitor in our midst and an outlaw band at our gates." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Judge Atkinson, you'll have a lot to answer for. But first, let Eliza Farnsworth go. She's innocent." Atkinson's eyes narrowed. "Sheriff, I suggest you check your facts." Tucker told a different tale before you left about Farnsworth's suspicious ties about certain land deeds. "She's as deep in this as any savage or outlaw." The outlaw leader, Cordell, spurred his horse a few steps forward. "Your feud with that slip of a girl is none of my concern," he said in a low, rasping voice. "I came here to settle another matter. Where is Tucker? I hear you've got him locked in that jail. He belongs to me." A ripple of fear and confusion roiled among the crowd. Eliza watched the standoff, head spinning from thirst and the urgent knowledge that there was a hidden plan behind all this. She prayed the sheriff had discovered enough. Daniels pushed on, raising his voice. "Cordell, you stand accused of multiple murders, horse theft, arson, and conspiracy to incite conflict with the Shawnee. Surrender, or my men, and I will see you behind bars permanently." Cordell barked a harsh laugh, scanning the nervous glances of the townsfolk. "I see a handful of men with guns and an entire settlement ripe for the taking. If you push me, should we test who has the advantage?" Judge Atkinson moved to stand near Cordell, as though forging an alliance. "Right there, careful, Sheriff. You might have one shot, but an entire town's safety is at stake. Cordell's willing to protect Maple Creek from the Shawnee threat if we let him settle his business with Tucker." Eliza's heart hammered. The full scope of Atkinson's intentions glimmered like an ugly gem. He wanted Cordell's muscle to push the settlement into a war with the Shawnee, so that in the chaos, the gold-laden land would fall into his hands. In the hush that followed, Cordell's men shifted in their saddles, scanning the watchers, tension coiled tight enough to snap. Across the way, Deputy Finch peeked out from behind a corner, face etched in dread. A single shot could ignite a bloodbath. Then the sheriff spoke again. "Judge Atkinson, I've discovered something vital while searching for Cordell. My men intercepted messages, ones that show you've been dealing with him from the start, trading false leads, stirring up hatred against Miss Farnsworth and the Shawnee." A murmur rose among the settlers. Some openly stared at the judge. Eliza's pulse skyrocketed. Here was the truth surfacing. Atkinson's face darkened. "Ridiculous. Show me these so-called messages." Before the sheriff could produce anything, Cordell growled impatiently, scanning the scene. I've had enough of this. My men and I didn't ride out here just to watch you bicker. Where's Tucker? One of Atkinson's men piped up. That Tucker was still locked up, guarded by two loyalists. The judge set his jaw. Then let's handle that, Sheriff. If you interfere, you might find your precious Maple Creek overrun. The crowd pressed back, leaving Eliza Farnsworth still chained to the oak, the living symbol of this madness. She looked desperately at Sheriff Daniels, silently pleading for some break in the tension. If either side decided to shoot Maple Creek would become a war zone. Without warning, a motion near the tree line caught her eye. Running Arrow, the same quiet silhouette she had glimpsed before stepped out of the forest's edge. He was tall, lean with unmistakable Shawnee attire. Something about him exuded the calm of a predator. The stillness before a sudden strike, Eliza's breath caught. He was the one who'd observed her from a distance, the same she'd met on the forest path earlier, the same presence she felt last night. Running Arrow raised his bow, and Arrow knocked, though the crowd might have screamed Indian Raider. Nobody had quite spotted him yet, except Eliza. He aimed high. Realization thundered through her mind. He was aiming at the rope that bound her to the oak. She remembered the near impossibility of such a shot. Cordell shouted something about now or never, evidently deciding it was time to escalate. Atkinson hollered for men to seize Tucker from the jail. The sheriff and his deputies reached for their guns. In that split second, Eliza felt the rope tighten around her raw wrists as she shifted, and she prayed Running Arrow's aim was as uncanny as her instincts suggested. The arrow flew a blur in the morning sunlight, slicing across the clearing. The townspeople gasped, recoiling from the sudden strike. A heartbeat later, Eliza felt the rope slacken. Running Arrow's arrow had severed her bonds with surreal precision. The rope fell away, and she stumbled forward free for the first time in nearly a day. Shouts erupted. Some screamed, Shawnee attacker. Others cried, she's escaping. But Eliza gathered her wits swiftly, rubbing her injured wrists. She turned relief and astonishment swirling together to see Running Arrow vanish back into the tree line, his presence leaving behind the echo of his impossible shot. Pandemonium ensued. Cordell's men fanned out, uncertain whether to chase the fleeing Indian archer or keep the crowd at bay. Judge Atkinson, caught off guard by this sudden disruption, blustered orders that went unheeded. Sheriff Daniels, seizing opportunity, barked commands to his deputies, urging them to protect civilians and prevent Cordell's band from taking over Maple Creek entirely. Eliza Farnsworth, adrenaline surging after her miraculous release, darted aside. Her wrists burned, but the relief of not being pinned to the oak overwhelmed any pain. She heard some calling her name, Sarah Mitchell, Mr. Kirby, and others. With rapid footsteps she reached them, explaining in breathless fragments that the arrow had freed her. From across the square, Cordell swore viciously. He aimed a rifle, apparently deciding to shoot the first target he saw. But in the confusion, Running Arrow had repositioned himself behind a building. Another arrow whistled, striking the ground near Cordell's feet. The outlaw snarled, horse sidestepping violently. The shot wasn't intended to kill, but to confound. Meanwhile, the judge roared, "Stop that savage and the traitor Farnsworth." They're working together. He grabbed a pistol from one of his men, presumably to brandish in the direction of the crowd. But Sheriff Daniels, no longer outnumbered, advanced with a stern resolve. "Stand down," Atkinson Daniels commanded. "Your bluff is over. The real traitor is you. We have your notes. We found your gold-based negotiations. You used Cordell to sow chaos, push the settlers into a fight with the Shawnee, and claim the land for yourself once the dust settled." The judge, pale but still defiant, aimed his pistol at Daniels. "You dare accuse me of—" A single shot rang out, but not from the judge's weapon. Deputy Finch had fired into the air, stepping forward with trembling arms. "Enough, we've heard the sheriff. We've seen Farnsworth freed by that arrow, which means your accusations of her bonding with Cordell are false. Everyone put down your arms." Hesitation fluttered through the onlookers. Some of Cordell's outlaws started edging away, sensing the tide had turned. Judge Atkinson's hand shook on the pistol. He might yet pull the trigger in desperation. But a new presence intervened from behind the nearest building. A cluster of a dozen Shawnee warriors materialized, led by none other than Running Arrow. They had used the chaotic moment to infiltrate the edges of Maple Creek. Panic among the crowd threatened to spiral. "Shawnee runnin'," cried one mother, clutching her child. But Running Arrow raised an arm in a pacifying gesture, speaking in halting English. "No war. We want truth. We want peace. If your law is fair." For a breathless span, it seemed the entire world hovered on the brink. Then the sheriff lifted his revolver skyward and fired once an echo that signaled something akin to a ceasefire. Atkinson Cordell. "Drop your weapons," he growled. "Deputies, if they don't comply, shoot to wound." The judge's eyes flicked to Cordell, who stared back with an expression that indicated the alliance of convenience was now worthless. Cornered facing a group of determined settlers, an accomplished sheriff, and a band of armed Shawnee, the pair realized they were outmatched. Cordell let his rifle slip from his grasp to the ground, cursing under his breath. Atkinson, swallowing hard, lowered his pistol. The hush that followed was deafening. Eliza Farnsworth, still massaging her chafed wrist, stood near the old oak, catching her breath as if she'd just surfaced from deep water. Townspeople exhaled, some stooping to retrieve scattered possessions or to calm their skittish horses. Sarah Mitchell rushed over, offering Eliza water from a canteen. She gulped it gratefully, tears springing to her eyes from sheer relief. Running Arrow and his warriors maintained their disciplined stance, forming a half circle, as if ensuring no sudden moves from Cordell's gang. The sheriff, stepping onto the makeshift platform, confronted Atkinson head-on. "I have statements, Judge. Enough to convict you of conspiracy, murder by proxy, and incitement of war. You tricked us into believing Farnsworth was a spy, all to make sure you could push your gold lust forward." "That ends now," Atkinson sputtered. "You can't prove I can," Finch said, stepping up. He held out the folded documents he had found earlier, referencing deals with Cordell and instructions about forging certain letters in Eliza's name. "Here's everything." The judge's face blanched. Cordell, realizing all was lost, spat at the ground near Atkinson's feet. "You were supposed to guarantee me a bigger cut." "So much for that," the outlaw muttered bitterly. A murmur ran through the crowd, the settlers now grasping the scale of Atkinson's manipulation. Mr. Kirby, Sarah Mitchell, and others murmured words of apology to Eliza, though overshadowed by the swirling shock of betrayal. At the edge of the clearing, Running Arrow and his warriors watched tensely. They had not come to conquer Maple Creek, but to ensure no forced war marched upon their own villages. The tension in their stances eased a fraction as Atkinson, Cordell, and the outlaws began to surrender arms under the sheriff's direction. Eliza Farnsworth, heart still pounding, locked eyes with Running Arrow. A profound relief and unspoken gratitude flowed between them. If not for his arrow, she might be in a grave or swinging from the oak. If not for his willingness to stand at the settlement's edge with fellow braves, Maple Creek might have plunged into a full-scale conflict. In that moment beneath the oak that had so often witnessed tragedy, a sense of hope kindled, a recognition that perhaps the frontier's harsh lines could be bridged by shared compassion and a single well-aimed shot. In the hours that followed the confrontation, Maple Creek was a swirling storm of activity. Sheriff Daniels and his deputies secured Cordell and his men inside the badly damaged jail, stationing extra guards to prevent any rescue attempt. Judge Atkinson, stripped of his legal veneer, found himself ironically occupying the very cell once slated for Tucker. Many townspeople gathered to peer through the jailhouse windows or exchange stories in hushed voices. The truth of the judge's betrayal sinking in. Eliza Farnsworth, still bruised and shaken from her ordeal, was approached by well-wishers throughout the day. Mothers whose children she had delivered, farmers she had treated for infections, families who had once trusted her father. Apologies and relief spilled forth in an outpouring of collective shame and gratitude. More than a few admitted they had feared or suspected her due to her Cherokee heritage. Now they realized how easily they had been manipulated by Atkinson's campaign. By late afternoon, the necessity of forging a new agreement with the Shawnee became urgent. Running Arrow and his warriors had stationed themselves at the edge of town, not wanting to impose but ready for discussion. Sheriff Daniels led a delegation, Deputy Finch, Mr. Kirby, even Sarah Mitchell as a representative of local families out to meet them. Eliza accompanied them, feeling a fresh wave of anxiety. She had recognized in Running Arrow a spirit akin to her own, bridging two worlds. But forging a peaceful arrangement required more than a single arrow or a moment of heroism. In a small glade near Maple Creek River, they formed a circle. Running Arrow, flanked by two older braves, greeted them in calm courtesy. Through measured conversation, it emerged that the Shawnee had been aware of the gold rumors for a long time, but had chosen not to exploit them, regarding the land as sacred. Cordell and Atkinson, by contrast, saw only profit. They had hoped to spark open conflict, after which all claims to the land would be moot, under a wave of settler victory. The delegates from Maple Creek, chastened and newly aware of their ignorance, spoke of forging real peace. Sheriff Daniels promised to respect the existing treaties, a point that Running Arrow underscored With the mention of Eliza's father's old map, which spelled out the boundaries clearly, Finch, stepping into a role none expected him to take, advocated for a council that would include both settlers and Shawnee meeting regularly to address disputes without bloodshed. Running Arrow nodded approval. If words speak truth, he said quietly, our people can walk side by side. But words must not hide a second face, Eliza listened, heart swelling with cautious hope. Once the idea of a formal arrangement between Maple Creek and local Shawnee bands might have seemed absurd, yet the transformation wrought by the day's events proved that adversity could break open the hardest hearts, allowing the seeds of understanding to root back in town. As twilight fell, a subdued celebration took shape. Families who had barricaded themselves indoors emerged, gathering in the square to share simple foods to talk about the future. Sheriff Daniels and a few men led Cordell's outlaws away, intending to transfer them to a more secure holding in a larger settlement. Judge Atkinson would face charges of conspiracy and attempted murder under official territorial oversight. Eliza Farnsworth found herself once again beneath the Maple Creek oak, but this time free, a scarf covering her still tender wrists. Running Arrow approached. Standing beside her in the hush of approaching night, she turned to meeting his gaze with a gentle smile. Thank you, she repeated the words deeper. Now that the crisis had passed, he inclined his head. Your father's blood gave you strength. Your own spirit gave you wisdom. The arrow only cuts where the mind aims. Eliza exhaled, brushing her fingers lightly over the bark of the oak. I think Maple Creek will remember this day for a long time, the day we nearly destroyed ourselves and the day we learned we didn't have to running. Arrow nodded gravely, then gestured to the forest that had once been the domain solely of his people. Two worlds cross here, let them cross in peace. As the final glow of daylight faded, they parted ways, Eliza to help the wounded Running Arrow to rejoin his fellow braves preparing to depart for their village. Each carried a fragment of the other's world, forging a link that might yet grow into an enduring bond. And the old oak, silent witness to the darkest hours of the settlement, now stood in the soft lamplight, its bark marked by a single arrow's scar, a tribute to the power of a precise shot that severed bonds both visible and invisible, and allowed the sunlight of truth to break through the long night. Over the weeks that followed, Maple Creek felt a subtle but profound shift. Where fear had nearly lit the fuse of all-out conflict, determination to forge a shared future now grew stronger each day. A few curious settlers visited the Shawnee village, guided by Running Arrow, and welcomed with cautious warmth. Eliza Farnsworth found her healing skills in demand. Like never before, families from both communities sought her remedies, and she happily taught them the knowledge her father had passed down. Looking back, what began as an impossible shot that freed a bound woman became a powerful symbol that cut through deeper chains of mistrust. With Cordell's gang disbanded and Judge Atkinson facing trial for his deceptions, the frontier around Maple Creek gained a chance at genuine peace. It may never be perfect, but hearts are more open than before, and hope keeps flickering against the rugged backdrop of the mountains. Thank you for journeying with us. If this tale spoke to you, please subscribe, leave your thoughts in the comments, and share your own experiences. Frontier stories shine brightest when we discuss and learn from them together.